Good evening, everyone. My name is Marques Dexter, and I'm here tonight to give the next lecture for the Multicultural Service Program's lecture series on Black masculinity and implicit bias. And so to always start out these presentations, and please don't mind me, I am from Philly, I am silly, I can't help it, but we are all family here today to learn and grow together. But as I was saying, as I go through any presentation, I want it to be communal, relational, and so I'm going to tell you a little about who I am and my journey here to the University of Georgia. As I mentioned, I was born and raised in PA, Philadelphia, throughout most of my life. I was a collegiate jumper, but also competed in track and field throughout high school. And so originally I started out right at university, but after a year decided I need to make a transition for my own development and growth. And so I transferred to Robert Morris University, where I graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration with a concentration in sport management. Upon graduating from there, I attended the University of Georgia, where I eventually pursued my Master's in Science in Kinesiology with a specialization in sport management and policy. While here, I also was a volunteer track and field and cross-country coach for the UGA track and field cross-country programs, as well as a program coordinator and recruiting coordinator. Upon graduation in 2009, I started as an assistant coach and recruiting coordinator at SUNY Cortland and spent 6 years there. Had a lot of success. My athletes had a lot of success. I also was an academic advisor as well as instructor in physical education. But there became a time where I realized there's a void. There's something missing. I don't know what it is. I see my athletes, I see my students, especially those of color, going through a lot of difficulties and kind of, somewhat to say, confused about what's next and how to get there. So I had to really think about what can I do? How can I affect change in their lives? And that's when I decided, you know what, it's time to move on. It's time to move on from coaching and go back to school, particularly since one of my mentors, who I'm trying not to get choked up about, Dr. Rex Crawley, he passed away from cancer. And I always had that promise that Dr. Dexter was going to happen. And so because of that, I made the transition, moved from SUNY Cortland, from Cortland, New York, upstate New York, all the way down to Fayetteville, Georgia, to pursue and come back to University of Georgia for my doctorate. And so since, 2016, I've been at the University of Georgia as a PhD student and now candidate in the Mary Frances Early College of Education, pursuing my PhD in kinesiology with a specialization in sport management and policy. Throughout this journey, I've had an amazing opportunity to meet some of my heroes, which is John Carlos, Tommy Smith, speak across the country, share my research and interests, as well as engage as a student leader here on campus. I'm currently the president of Blue Key Honor Society. I was a recipient of Black Faculty and Staff Organization's Student Leader Award, as well as one of last year's, the graduate student, President Fulfilling the Dream Award recipient. Throughout all these accomplishments, it has allowed me to now transition as the Assistant Director for Student Initiatives within the Office of Institutional Diversity, staying here at my alma mater, my second home in Athens, Georgia, supporting student diversity all across and inclusion across this institution as well as throughout the state. And so before I get started, I want to go over some common terms, some key terms that some people may not be fully familiar with, but others may be. And so when we think about social constructs, you may hear me speak about that tonight. A social construct is an idea that has been created and accepted by people in society. So we create things. What may be a chair for us in those in other countries and other cultures may be something else. And so we socially constructed. What we know of a chair, we know when you think about it, it's something you sit in. Sometimes you stand on. Sometimes you put things in. But for someone else who may not know what a chair is or even what it's called, that could be a monument. So things, in a sense, as a society, we adopt these meanings. And so in a sense, that's what a social construct. Everything, in a sense, can be a social construct. And so next is social norms. They are the informal rules that govern behavior in groups and societies. For some of us, Those rules can be, you open the door for someone to get there, or when someone's coming, you step and allow them to enter. These are some of the things that throughout society that are adopted. There are different things. A lot of time, these social norms and social rules can become laws. A lot of our laws are these socially acceptable ways of acting. Next up, which is really something interesting to think about, and some of you may have heard of biological sex, but I'm going to talk about assigned sex, is a label that's been given at birth based on medical factors, such as types of numbers of hormones, chromosomes, and even the type of genitalia someone may have. And then most people are assigned male or female, but there is a certain percentage of this country that is assigned intersex. When someone's sexual reproductive anatomy may not fit those definitions of male or female, that's when sometimes we move outside of assigned sex, and it can be confused with what's gender. And so gender refers to the characteristics that men, women, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. So the norms, the behaviors, the roles that are associated with this, those are different ones. As you can see on the slide here today, we have a lot of different gender definitions. And so what I really want you to understand is that what we know as assigned or biological sex is not the same thing as gender. Definitions can be tricky, but we're all here to learn and grow together. And so masculinity, it is the quality, state, or degree of being masculine or manly. So remember this as we go through and dialogue today. And again, I want this to be a dialogue. At some point, I will ask for the audience to kind of join in, give me some of their definitions of things. And so just be ready. Let's engage. Let's be a true Bulldog Nation and family, even if you're not a member. For tonight, you will be. And so implicit bias, they are the subconscious attitudes, perceptions, and stereotypes that influence our understandings, actions, and behaviors when interacting with various identities. And so many of us have these. A lot of times they're unconscious, and in some, it can be a difference between our unconscious and implicit biases. But we're not going to get too deep. I don't want this to be too much of an academic lecture, per se. I want this to be more of a learning and growing lecture. And so here's that time that I mentioned before in terms of engagement. So for some of you, and those of you who are joining in on the chat, when you think about it, what does it mean to be masculine or a man? I'd love for all of you right now to put in which are some of the words that come to mind when you think about this. And so I'm going to pause for a bit to give you a chance to kind of type in and join in. And I've got my other family members here to let me know, because I cannot see what you're saying just yet. Ooh. Yes. So we've heard patriarchal, tough. What else? Come on, y'all. When you think about masculine, or you think about the word man, or you want to describe it, what are some words you'd like to describe it as? Strong. Yes. Let's do one more. Ooh, okay. I don't know who that was, but I like that. But at the same time, we can't not think about our women. They need to be thought of as leaders too, but thank you. That ties back to patriarchy, but we ain't going to get there tonight. And so, yes, when you think about it, there are a lot of roles and descriptions and attitudes that are assigned when you think about man and masculinity, manhood, and so forth. You know, we think about sometimes fatherhood, athlete, strong, but sometimes there's these negative ones that are sometimes hidden because of our interactions with our environments. There may be certain experiences that have happened to us that unfortunately have caused us to have certain attitudes or perceptions about others. And so while there may be some positives, there also are some negatives. You know, at times you may think of men, especially black men at times, as something negative, fearful, criminal. We see some of these what's called tropes throughout society and the media. Whether they're intentional or not, they are what we call perpetuated and instilled, and they become ingrained within us. And unfortunately, while we may not be conscious of these things happening, we carry those things with us as we navigate society and we engage with others, even if they may not be of the same color, the same race, ethnicity, gender, or assigned sex. And so when I think about masculinity and manhood, a lot of times I draw back on some of the greats, some of the great scholars and literary members. And so bell hooks once said, the first act of violence that patriarchy demands of men is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all men that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts themselves. As we know, a lot of times in the black community, there are times which, especially for men, that we hide parts of ourselves, that being so emotional is not ascribed or assigned to masculinity. And that's not always a good thing, as we know that there are health issues that come up when these things, when we hold in, we bottle our emotions, and a lot of times that can come out, especially with athletes. Many times we may see athletes just become enraged. I was just having a conversation with one of my friends and colleagues today where there was a former athlete, football player, talking about the rage that they had built up from that sport that is just ingrained in it, and that aggressiveness. And sometimes we don't always know that's there until it's too late. And so again, to talk about some of the scholars, Majors and Bilson came up with this term called cool pose, in which they've noticed and that many black men and boys, as they navigate society, have put on this persona where they've defined the manhood in terms of familiar to what's familiar to the dominant culture. So breadwinner, provider, protector, and so forth, procreator. And as this happens, this is a response to a lot of times the history of oppression that's occurred throughout history in terms of like society. When you go back to the enslaved Africans coming over and colonization and colonial times and even so forth. And so this social isolation has happened in this country where in terms of this persona, this coolness becomes a survival strategy for them. And in terms, it also becomes an issue because you pay a price. You can lose part of yourself because you're putting on, as Du Bois talks about, this double consciousness, this way of being not just black or back then known as Negro, but also American. And so Cool Post talks about that. But it doesn't apply to all black males, and it doesn't apply all the times. It talks about how they navigate society. And so wearing glasses, even my own text, I may have to move up a little bit to kind of read this. But essentially what this is talking about, and as you can see on the screen, there are protective factors and ways in which black men have navigated society. And we know about ways in which black men have, and others who are not part of the dominant race, have code switch in the ways they present themselves in those of the dominant culture. And then when they're with their homies, when they're with their friends, cousins, family, and so forth. And so unfortunately, society has forced many black men to fit into a box of what it means to be black, to be a man, to be a black man. And so even when you look at the picture on the screen, the first thing you probably look at is this is a mugshot. But actually, these are young black men who have graduated college. A lot of times we don't see the things around them. We just see their face, their expressions. And this whole movement of black men smile is important because too many times we see ourselves not showing emotion. And so someone who I respect a lot, whose book has been a mirror book, and who's one of our literary great activists, Darnell Moore, once said, the idea of manhood and masculinity has functioned like cages in his life. He's finally getting free because cages aren't doorways. His queerness, or rather his defying of norms and rules that have been a key to his freedom. While it's been a journey, and it's going to continue being a journey, it's worth it because he gets to live an authentic version of himself. And that's what this is all about. We have to get to a point where we let boys be feminine. And we also let girls be masculine. Because we need to let them be who they are and how they interact with society. But how can we do this? How can you, how can I, how can those around us really engage in this type of work to allow for black men and black boys to be their authentic selves? Well, first off, you've got to do the self-work. You've got to check yourself. You have to understand what are the notions, the norms, the rules, the things we think we know about what it means to be male, a man, to be black, all those intersections. And then reflect on that and instigate, why do we know this? Why do we believe this? Why have we adopted that? And from there, move on to educate and expand our awareness, our consciousness, and those who are around. If you're always around people who look like you, who act like you, who share some of the common things, you don't know anything else, and you can't grow from that. And so once you've done that self-worth, you need to empathize and then empower. So you've got to acknowledge, small font for me, acknowledge the ignorance. Because for one, you have to know that we don't all know everything. At times, we are probably ignorant about things. And from there, we have to respect. My glasses, unfortunately, fogged up. Respect their desires. We can't have them fit into this mold. We need to respect the fact that they sometimes are probably crying inside and wanting to be something different than what society wants them to be. And then from there, affirm their distinctiveness. Tell them that they belong. Tell them that they are fine how they are, the way they are. If they are hyper-masculine and that's how they authentically are, there's nothing wrong with that. But make sure that that's an authentic version of themselves. But also empower them to ignore the hate. There are going to be others who want them to fit into a box. And you cannot allow that to happen. You have to empower them to do that internal work, that intrinsic work to be who they are, who they are, to investigate that for themselves. And lastly, support them along the journey. It is going to take time. It is going to be something that is probably hard for them to do. You know, I've spent 30 years of my life still, now I'm in the second half of 30, trying to understand, who am I? What is this journey I'm on? As I mentioned, I changed careers, and for some, that can be scary. Many of our elders had one job, and they stayed at that job for years. Some of our parents may have gone from job to job, but they're still in a similar career. But for many of us in this generation, this newer generation, these millennials and Gen Zs, you know, a lot of you are still trying to figure things out. You know, technology has impacted the ways in which you view the world much differently. I remember having a sidekick, and now today if I brought a sidekick, I'm probably going to get side-eyed as, what is that? Going back to and having car phones that look like they're probably an iPad mini. But things are always changing, but at the same time, too, we are always changing, we're always growing. And I leave you always, and I always love to leave everybody with a quote from Uncle Jimmy, James Baldwin. And he said, "A child cannot be taught by anyone who despises him, and a child cannot afford to be fooled. A child cannot be taught by anyone whose demand, essentially, is that the child repudiate his experience and all that gives him sustenance." So again, I hope we all have learned something today and do that self-work to understand how we can better support our black men, our black boys, but also our black women in terms of figuring out, and those in between, those who may identify the LGBTQIA plus community, as they investigate who they are and not try to fit them into what we feel is acceptable or right. And with that, I thank you and open it up to questions. Awesome. Ooh, oh, someone really started on the way. So, first question. Love to hear more about, your relationship with masculinity or how it's impacted your self-knowledge. So, that is a great question. When I was younger, I went to an art school from 1st to 8th grade. And so in that, we were exposed to all the arts. And with it, I also was a dancer. I was classically trained in modern, somewhat jazz and tap. And I remember when I was 12, I had an audition with the Pennsylvania Ballet. And before then, I also had an audition potentially to be a star of a commercial for the New Jersey Aquarium in Camden. And I didn't go. One, because as I always tell people, I'm very shy. I put, like Beyonce has Sasha Fierce, I put on what my nickname is at home, Mooks. Mooks comes on, it's a whole different person. But inside, I'm like, oh my gosh, hi. And so with that, I remember talking to my mother when I was 12 and telling her, I don't want to go to the audition. I don't think I want to do dance or pursue this seriously. But really it was, I didn't want to go here because if I got this, I didn't want to be looked at as people thinking I was gay. I was being girly, that I loved dance, and that there was a problem with that. And still to this day, I regret that. I regret not doing what I love. I found so much joy expressing myself through the arts. And I truly hope that with this new administration also, that we fund the arts much more, because you are able to think outside the box and be much more creative and express yourselves. And there's so much we can learn from being creative. And so, yeah, that's one of the first areas or the first times I really had to think about myself, my masculinity, my manhood, and how it's going to affect my future. And so, I put myself into a box of what others thought of me, or what I thought they thought of me. Great question. So it says, implicit bias is a hot topic with many situations over the last few years. How does one who's part of the dominant culture address their implicit bias? Great question, and thank you for wanting to go on that journey and that self-reflection. It's easy to say reading, educating yourself, but again, you could journal. You can start thinking about what are the ways, what are your thoughts? Activity before, writing down some of these words, looking at where they're coming from and investing in that. And so again, doing that self-work. Many times, like I said, I'm still learning in the DEI space. And I was having a conversation with my colleague today. There's so many ways in which I can be better at supporting students of different identities, particularly advocating much more for those who are non-domestic, who are international students, and better understanding their experiences and how I and this institution and the society can better support them. Because again, this is all one earth, all one planet. And so we have to see how we can better come together to move forward. And so again, I'd say do that self-work and really first interrogate what you believe you know about others. And from there, there definitely is the Harvard IAT test, implicit attitudes test, and it definitely goes through different ways in which you can investigate your own implicit biases towards race, gender, and so forth. And so that's another opportunity to engage in this type of work. But thank you for that question. So what advice would you give to a young black man who's attempting to have these conversations with the mentors in their life? May have to first reflect on those mentors. Because in a sense, if they can't accept or support you for all of you, then are they truly your mentor? But important thing is, in terms of mentorship, there should be multiple mentors. You should have mentors based upon what you need. And so you may have a mentor for the future career you want to have. You may want to have a mentor for particular courses, a mentor for leadership. I have a mentor who helps me with public speaking, which I'm still working on, but also with that, how to have my own business and be an entrepreneur. And so find those people and, again, learn those balance and learn those relationships. Have a conversation about that. You know, what are you getting out of this and what are they? And so mentorship should be relational. It shouldn't be transactional. You shouldn't be just pouring from them or having them pour into you. You should also pour into them. And it should be something you both are benefiting from. And if not, well, you may need to get someone else or have an additional mentor. And so again, reflect upon who these individuals are and see how you potentially can expand that group of mentors. Why do you think discussing masculinity in relation to the LGBT community still is such a taboo topic? You know, people have written dissertations and books on that. The first word that comes to mind is intersectionality. And so we aren't a monolith. And even in my own research, part of the ways in which I'm going about my study of looking at academically and athletically high-achieving black male former athletes is how can I better look at them as an individual, as a heterogeneous person. Who are they as a person? So who is Jack? Who is Alex? Aaron? Rashid? Whatever. Who are they? Not who is this black man? And so again, that intersectionality of identities complicates things. And that's the tough part, again, because a lot of these ways in which we define ourselves or are being defined is socially constructed. And so when you live outside the margins of what society deems as acceptable, it becomes very tough. And so again, within that community as a whole, because again, we cannot exclude those who are straight from the community in the sense of how can we exist together. But at the same time, we need to cultivate spaces for ourselves. And even within the LGBTQIA plus community, we have to also investigate race and ethnicity and nationality and how that plays into everything. And so again, it's investigating ourselves, what are our identities, how we see ourselves, how we want to be seen. And again, if there isn't a space for us, well, how can we make space? And not even just make space, how can we exist? That's what the big thing is. And so you want to exist. If others don't want you to, that's their problem. You can't stress about things you can't control. But thank you for that question. I tell you, I'm real silly. So it seems masculinity has a strong space in our society in combating those negative ideas about masculinity. How can an ally support men in their development? Well, in one sense, you see, kind of identify how they want to be supported, but also if they want to be supported. And so that's the tough thing about allyship is at many times people think that's the end all, but we also have an accomplice, and you can also have a co-conspirator. So it really depends. You really have to have conversations with individuals to see how they may want to be supported, but also if they want to be supported sometimes. There are individuals who may have so much trauma or been through so much trauma and so many negative experiences that honestly they may not want to think about it. And so because of that, they may not want anyone to really help them at that time. But if it becomes detrimental to their health and well-being, that's when intervention may need to happen. But at the same time, too, support them along the journey is the biggest thing. So as this individual may be struggling through their own identity development and identity formation, depending on what that identity is, all you can do is just be there, let them know you're there. That's the most important thing. As long as they know that there's a community of individuals supporting them no matter what, they know that they are protected and they're shrouded. And that's what's important. I'm giving y'all gems for free, so I'm just letting y'all know. Keep it coming for now. I need to learn how to start getting paid for this. It's like, no, I appreciate this work. I told y'all I'm silly. But you know, I can give y'all my Cash App too. I didn't say that. Awesome. Well, again, thank y'all so much. I should have been a little bit more strategic at making sure that my contact information up there, but Google is amazing. I'm not getting paid by them for saying it, but search it just. Oh, wait, we got a question? Hey, y'all like me. No problem. But again, I'm in the Office of Institutional Diversity, and so people, you're more than welcome to reach out, and social media. It is my name, and my website is Marques R. Dexter. That's MarQues R. Dexter. Question is, how does the intersection of the masculine athlete and black masculinity complicate identity development? Whew. Have you had success in helping athletes separate the two? So the second part is tough, if you can leave it for 1 second, the first part, particularly because I shouldn't always talk about things in the sense of I have been able to help individuals in terms of helping them along their journey of their own identity development. And it doesn't matter whether they are black, white, Latinx, Asian, or whatever other potential race or ethnic group, I have been able to support individuals throughout that. It may just so happen that they were black and identified as a man. But the intersection of masculinity and athleticism, again, that's a whole dissertation plus. But yes, as we know in sports, there's even a big conflict happening right now of trans athletes' rights and their ability to compete as the gender they identify as. Doesn't matter what sex they were assigned at birth. Who are they now? And yes, it's complicated. It's not as simple as saying, oh, well, they identify as a man, let them compete with men, boys, so to say, because, we're all down to science, and it has to do with chromosomes and this belief that men are stronger than women, and yes, their bone density and so on and so forth, but they're actually at young levels, actually men and women, boys and girls develop around the same. So one's not necessarily stronger than the other. Genetics do play a big part in it. And so I love the fact that sport writ large it's trying to figure this out. It's not going to happen overnight. There are injustices that are happening, specifically like casteism, where we're unsure of truly how to allow. But the thing is an issue is confining them down to forcing them to take any type of drugs to alter who they are naturally. If I naturally have higher estrogen levels as a male assigned individual, I just have more estrogen. If I was assigned female at birth and I have higher levels of testosterone than the quote-unquote average or quote-unquote normal female, isn't that a gift? For those religious, isn't that a gift? And so why are we penalizing? Because at the same time, our unique genetic makeup predisposes us for certain activities to potentially be better than others. And so, again, yes, I'm trying not to be on a soapbox, but it's tough. I'm really just big about people being authentic and being who they want and choose to be and figuring it out. And it's just exciting to see shows like Pose and many others who are giving the media something different, who are giving society something different to have a glimpse into a world they don't really know much about without it being stereotypical. And it's authentic because it's individuals who identify within these communities. And so, again, with sport, sport is a microcosm of society, and so you can't separate sport from what's going on in society, especially if it's here in the U.S., if it's in another country, even if it's on Mars, if there ever was. But all we can do is really work towards affirming others as who they want to be and not ascribing who we want them to be. Thank you. Well, I think that's my time. So thank you all for hanging out with me, enjoying my silliness, engaging with me, asking these questions. If anyone has any additional questions, please reach out. I'd love to talk more. Believe it or not, I don't like hearing my own voice, but I love to support others in their own journey of discovery. So thank you again, and have a great night, and go Dogs.